You're listening to the Patenting for Inventors podcast with registered patent attorney, Dr. Adam Diament, founder of Diament Patent Law, the #1 source for securing your intellectual property needs. Now, here's your host, Adam Diament.
Hello and welcome to the Patenting for Inventors podcast, episode 125, Trademarking the Geographical Center of North America. My name is Adam Diament, a registered patent attorney and founder and owner of Diament Patent Law in Los Angeles, California. I can be contacted through my website at diamentpatentlaw.com. That's DIAMENT patentlaw.com, or you can call me at 424-281-0162. Most of my episodes are about the patenting process, but as an inventor, you might have some needs for copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets, and that's why I've thrown in an episode here and there about other areas of intellectual property, even though I try to keep most of my episodes patent-related. In this episode, I'm going to talk about trademarks again because I was watching one of my favorite news shows, CBS Sunday Morning, and if you're always complaining about news stories only reporting on bad news and they never cover good news, then if you're not already watching CBS Sunday Morning, you should watch it. If the regular news has something about a bridge collapsing, CBS Sunday Morning might have a story about the longest standing bridge and the story behind it. So in this episode, they had a story about the Geographical Center of the United States. Now, what this has to do with trademarks, you'll find out in a little bit, but the story starts with the town of Rugby, North Dakota. They claimed in the 1930s that they were the geographical center of North America. There's even a geographical center historical society there. So how did it come to be that this was the geographical center? An employee at the U.S. Geological Society took a cutout of North America, looked like a big puzzle piece block, and then tried to balance it on top of a pin. Now, if you remember in physics, the place where an object will balance and not tip over is the center of mass of the object. And what he found was that the balance point was on Rugby, North Dakota. So Rugby's claim to fame that it was the geographical center of North America. So here's where the story gets a little bit more interesting and where trademarks start to come into the story. There's this bar called Hansen's Bar in a town called Robinson, North Dakota, and it's about 100 miles south of Rugby, North Dakota. The owner of the bar decided to do his own measurements on the center of North America, took some string on a globe, made it go from point to point in different places, and he said that it wasn't Rugby that was the center of North Dakota, but it was Robinson, North Dakota, that was the geographical center of North America. Now, according to the show, the owner looked to see if Rugby trademarked geographical center, and they had, but it lapsed. So the bar owner filed a trademark application, and he got a federal registration for geographical center. And the Rugby people weren't happy about that. And now this is where the show glosses over some trademark details, which I'm going to get into. But what happened next is that a professor in the geography department at the University of Buffalo decided to do his own determination on the geographical center of North America and where it was. And he entered various longitudes and latitudes of the coastline of the continent. He entered it into a computer program. And what he found was that neither Rugby nor Robinson were the geographical center, but a town actually called Center, North Dakota. Now, what are the odds that the actual center was in a place called Center? And it was called Center because it was the center of the county, but it's also at the center of North America as well. So in Center, North Dakota, they set up some monuments to mark themselves as the true center of North America. Now, in the end, the show says that the Hansen Bar people gave their trademark back to Rugby. So I wanted to find out what really happened by looking at the trademark office. And in my journey, I'm going to let you know some lessons you can learn about what you should do about your own mark by learning things that happen in this story. Now, first, I wanted to find the marks. So I typed in Geographic Center of North America, and nothing came up. I thought that was weird. I typed in Geographic Center to find anything that would come up with those terms. Nothing. So I rewatched the segment because there was a very short snapshot of the trademark certificate. And what I found is that what I was typing was a Geographic Center, but the actual mark registered was Geographical Center. In a simple search, you will only find identical marks because the terms geographic and geographical are not identical words. So the basic trademark search will miss it. So lesson 1, you should not rely on a quick and dirty trademark search to clear your mark. You will miss lots of marks that aren't identical. And this could cause problems for you because marks can be refused if they're confusingly similar. You want to do a comprehensive trademark search. You can try yourself, but you really need to know how to search or you can use an attorney such as myself to conduct the comprehensive trademark search and analysis. Now that I had the term Geographical Center of North America, I found that Rugby, North Dakota filed a logo application in 1965. They got it allowed, but then it lapsed in 1989. Then it looks like in 1989, they registered a new logo, and it was canceled in 1997. They let their first logo probably go abandoned because they made a new logo and didn't care about the first one. Then in 1997, they filed a trademark application for another logo, and they got that one allowed in 1998. And the class of goods was for Chamber of Commerce services, namely promoting business and tourism in Rugby, North Dakota. But when it came time to file their declaration 10 years later to say that they were continuing to use it and pay the maintenance fee, they never filed it or paid it, so the trademark registration was canceled. I looked at the file history, and it looks like they maybe tried to pay something and submit some documents, but for some reason it didn't go through, and I can't tell why and what happened. But there are some things in the record that say 2007, but it looks like the documents are from 2004. A little confusing there. But the reason for it being dead is, quote, registration canceled because registrant did not file an acceptable declaration under Section 8. So whatever happened, and I'm not sure exactly what it was that their declaration and fees that were required at the 10-year mark were never paid. I guess the lesson to learn here is that you should always check the status of your trademark to make sure everything's been accepted to keep the mark active. You can do it yourself, but your attorney should also do this for you. Now, maybe they thought that, who's going to try to take a mark called Geographical Center of North America with their logo, and they figured, I'm not going to pay a few $100s to keep this active. But, the lesson to learn here is even if someone's not trying to register your exact mark with your city name, they might register something or try to register something similar. And if they had kept it active, the trademark examiner may have refused that new mark. So even if you don't think it's worth a few $100s to keep your mark registered, you might want to think again. Next comes the Hansen's bar application. In the show, he said he checked for a Geographical Center of North America, and he said it was registered but lapsed. Now, technically, that mark was never registered by anyone. What was registered was the logo that had a map on it of the U.S., and it also said Rugby, North Dakota, and it had the words Geographical Center of North America. No one had just registered Geographical Center of North America by itself. So Hansen's Bar filed the application in 2015, and the class of goods was, quote, promoting recreation and tourism in Robinson, North Dakota. A couple lessons here about how a trademark application is examined. A trademark examiner is only interested in whether a trademark application can be registered by looking at actively registered marks. If a mark is dead, the examiner isn't going to refuse the new mark because the previous mark is dead. If Rugby had kept their mark active, there's a good chance that the examiner would have refused the mark for being confusingly similar. The examiner would have said the Hansen's Bar's mark for the words are the majority of the words in the logo, and it would confuse consumers into thinking that it was the same entity that had both marks. Now, if that happened, could Hansen's have said, Rugby's mark, its class of goods is Chamber of Commerce services, namely promoting business and tourism in Rugby, North Dakota, and my class of goods is promoting recreation and tourism in Robinson, North Dakota. And they're not the same thing, and these classes of goods don't overlap because Rugby, North Dakota is 100 miles away from Robinson, North Dakota, so consumers wouldn't have even been confused, and both can coexist. Now, that is a strong argument. I'm not sure how strong an argument it is. Two places in the middle of North Dakota, both claiming to be the center of North America. There could be some confusion there. This sounds like a law school exam question where there's no black and white answer. But they didn't even have to make that argument because the examiner couldn't refuse Hansen's bar mark on confusion because there was no active trademark by Rugby. Hansen's bar mark of Geographical Center of North America actually did get initial refusal, but it wasn't for being confusingly similar, it was for being merely descriptive. Now, registration can be refused if the mark, quote, if it describes an ingredient, quality, characteristic, function, feature, purpose, or use of an applicant's goods and or services, end quote. The examiner basically says that this mark is for promoting recreation and tourism in Robinson, North Dakota. It's just descriptive of the services. The examiner also said that normally they can move the registration over to the supplemental register, but because this was an intent to use application and not an in-use application, they couldn't do that. Now let me explain what that means. there are several types of ways to file an application. The two most common ways are intent to use application and in-use application. If you're already using the mark, you file an in-use application. But you can actually file an application before you're using the mark. Let's say you're going to launch a new product and you haven't launched it yet, but you don't want anyone to steal your mark. You can file an intent to use application. And then later, if your application's allowed, you file proof that you're now actually using it. So going back to the principal and supplemental register is that descriptive marks cannot be on the principal register. Now, without going into all the details, the principal register gives you stronger and better protection, but you can get descriptive marks on the supplemental register, which gives you some protection, but it's not as strong. If you have a descriptive mark, sometimes you have no choice but to file it and get it allowed on the supplemental register. What happens then is that if your descriptive mark is being used for at least 5 years, and it becomes specifically associated with your brand or service or product, you can then have that mark go on the principal register. But one caveat is that if you file an intent to use application, you cannot request that your mark be on the supplemental register. This is what happened with Hansen's bar. The examiner said that it was descriptive and said you can't even go on to the supplemental register because you're not actually using it yet. Once you start using it, then you can go on the supplemental register. So what Hansen's bar did was they filed an allegation of use and a photo of the mark being used for promotional services. Because they filed an allegation of use, it was now considered an in-use mark. So they could go on to the supplemental register, which is what happened, and they got their mark registered on the supplemental register. So now Rugby must have gotten wind of this. They saw, or someone told them, that someone got a trademark for the Geographical Center of North America. And obviously they didn't like that, but they didn't have their own mark registered anymore. Now let me say one thing. Just because Rugby, North Dakota didn't have a registered mark anymore, and Hansen's bar had a mark, Hansen's bar couldn't just go to them and say, you have to stop using your logo because I have the mark for the Geographical Center of North America. And that's because Rugby still has what are called common law rights. Without going into all the details, common law rights give you rights to use your mark and to stop people from using the mark in places where you're already using it. So if Rugby could show that they were using their mark all over North Dakota and other geographical locations, they could still use their mark, and they could actually stop Hansen's bar from using their own registered mark because Rugby was using it first in particular locations. But Hansen's bar could stop Rugby from expanding the use of their mark into other locations. So if Rugby, North Dakota never promoted itself in California, Hansen's bar could stop them from doing that in the future because Hansen's has the registered trademark, which gives Hansen's bar nationwide rights to stop others from using the mark. So Rugby, they then filed their trademark application again for the logo, and they got a new trademark registration for their logo. Now, in theory, I think the trademark examiner could have refused their mark for being confusingly similar to Hansen's bar's new mark that just had the words Geographical Center of North America, but that didn't happen. So Rugby's, they got their mark allowed and registered, and as soon as they did, they filed what's called a cancellation proceeding with the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board to cancel Hansen's Geographical Center of North America mark. They made the argument that they were using the mark for decades and that Hansen's bar's mark came much later and was confusingly similar. Hansen's bar responded to the cancellation, made a few arguments, saying that Rugby's mark never should have registered because it's a deceptive mark since Rugby isn't even in the actual Geographical Center of North America. Hansen's bar also said that they offered to coexist together, but that Rugby rejected it. And Hansen's bar also said that people wouldn't be confused by the two different marks because the towns were over 100 miles apart, so there'd be no confusion. After reading through all the documents at the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board, what happened next is that a few months later, Hansen's bar filed what's called a surrender for cancellation, where they just decided to surrender. I don't know what happened behind the scenes and why Hansen's bar just surrendered. Maybe Rugby paid Hansen's bar some money. Maybe Hansen's bar just didn't feel like fighting it anymore because it would cost a lot to keep fighting and it wasn't worth it. But in the end, Rugby has their logo mark again, and Hansen's mark for the words Geographical Center of North America is considered a canceled mark. I don't think that Rugby's is going to let this logo mark lapse again and that they've learned an expensive lesson. Lots of lessons learned here. First, do a comprehensive trademark search. Don't let your marks lapse for lack of payment and updated documents. If you get a refusal for descriptiveness, you can go onto the supplemental register and then later go onto the principal register. If someone gets a mark similar to yours, you can try to cancel their mark. Probably lots of other lessons too, but those are the big ones from this interesting story. And if you want to see the segment on TV, just type in CBS Sunday Morning, Geographical Center of North America, and it should pop up. They don't go into all the trademark details like I do, and that's the fun stuff if you ask me, but it's a fun segment with lots of interesting characters. And if you want help with your patent application, trademarks, copyrights, responding to rejections, appeals, or anything else related to your invention, you can contact me directly through my website at diamentpatentlaw.com. That's DIAMENT, patentlaw.com, or email me at adam@diamentpatentlaw.com, or call me at 424-281-0162. I'm Adam Diament, and until next time, keep on inventing.
Thanks for listening to the Patenting for Inventors podcast. For more information and help with your own intellectual property needs, contact Adam Diament directly by going to diamentpatentlaw.com. That's DIAMENT patentlaw.com. Or click the show links to connect by phone, text, or social media. The contents of this podcast are intended for general informational purposes only. The facts of every legal matter are unique, and the content of this podcast should not be construed as offering legal advice for your specific legal situation. The preceding information may be considered an attorney advertisement and does not establish any attorney-client relationship.